I'm one of the leaders of the Salmon Mine East Sages Firewise community out on the San Juan Ridge. I've been a volunteer for a long time for the Fire Safe Council, and now I'm the chair of the new Fire Safe Nevada County Coalition. And if any of you know about the Coalition of Firewise Communities, this is an extension of that and making it a little more formal. So we don't do fuel breaks, but we do a lot of education and support of Firewise communities. I'm also a retired U.S. Forest Service fire scientist and a California certified burn boss. So I want you to know a little bit about me because it's going to become evident why I say some of the things I do in my perspective. I have over 30 years of experience on wildfires and on prescribed fires. Lately it's more prescribed fires. And that includes on extreme wildfires. And I had a special fire behavior team, you'll see some of the video that we collected, where we went out ahead of wildfires and sometimes prescribed burns, and we set up heat-triggered video cameras, rate of spread sensors, we counted the trees, we counted the sticks, all really fast. And we were trying to measure the effectiveness of different fuel treatments as well as extreme fire behavior. So that was very informative. And I've done a lot of landscape resilience planning. And I'm a rural person, hick from the sticks, I say. I grew up in Quincy. So it's really impacted me personally to have seen all those fires that have impacted that entire county there. In fact, I haven't had the heart to go back up and visit since then. They all say we need to work faster. So what we want to talk about today is changing how wildfires burn, because they're going to come. It's not a matter of if, it's when. So far, we're this green island in between. It's not going to last. I'm going to talk about understanding the past because it'll help us inform our choices now. I'm going to talk a little bit about the fire behavior and fuels, the basics of them, because in order to choose a fuel treatment, you need to understand how that treatment's going to affect fire, because that's what you're really trying to do is change fire. I'll talk about fuel breaks in defensible space, how we create them and why. And then I'll talk about different tools to reduce fuels, the pros and cons, because nothing's perfect, and you'll have to figure out for yourself which one's right for you. It's probably more than one. So in the past, fires burned, including in this area, very frequently. Could have been every few years, 10 years. It varied at higher elevations, a little more time in between. But lightning strikes and burning by Native Americans kept frequent fire. And we know that from counting in fire scars and trees. Now my husband back there cut like hundreds of them for me for my PhD. So I do know how to tell where and believe that it existed. And what that did is when you have frequent fire, it maintained low levels of fuels and patchy variable forest, because it killed a lot of those little trees. How many of you have little cedars in your yard? Okay, low intensity fires gets rid of that dense thicket. And then it promoted native plants. So in the last century, we've had big changes. In the early 1900s, very open park-like. It wasn't all like this. Obviously, or I don't know if it's obvious, in some areas we would have had denser pockets if it's a little wetter, but fire touched every part of the landscape. And within 50 years or less, because of the fire not killing those little trees, it would never kill all of them, they started to grow in until now we know what it looks like. It's a mess out there. It's a lot of trees. And if you think about how healthy they are, if you have a glass of water and you put 2 straws in there and you're sharing it with your loved one or whatever, you get plenty of water. If you put 20 straws in there, no one's getting enough. And the same things happens with trees. If there's a couple of them out there, they get plenty of water. If there's a bunch of them out there, they're sharing that water, especially during a drought, and that's part of what makes it easier for the insects to attack them. It also means that we get this very deep litter and duff layer, which is not just fuel, it's also keeping water, the rain, from getting down into the soil. So we're further starving them from water. For every 1 inch of litter and duff, it takes about 2 inches of water to get down there, through there. We've changed things a lot. So this is one of the videos that I took from my work 15 years, well, the treatment was 15 years ago. It was a recent treatment, but it was a light treatment. And here is what we measured.
The Black Mountain Tooth Fire. The fire swept
You probably can't hear it, but there's a loud because you could hear the crown fire from within this stainless steel box. What do you think the winds were that day? Any guesses? 3 miles per hour. That's right, it created its own winds. And partly because it was near a little ravine or a drainage. How many of you live near one of those or have one on your property? Chimney effect, it makes it faster. So what is a well-behaved fire? It is what it is, but definitely for us, a well-behaved fire is flames low to the ground, it's slow, and it doesn't look like this. That's another shot from one of my cameras where the flames are coming at it. And here is in the Plumas area near Greenville where the whole town burned down. And this person here had done a lot of thinning and a lot of treatment in the understory, all that litter and duff. They'd done prescribed burning and they survived. So the fire was good on their property and not so good around it. Now, thinking about fire behavior, a lot of it's pretty common sense, and we know how many of you use wood stove or a fireplace to heat your home. Okay, how many of you ever built a campfire? Okay, so you know, the more the fuels, the hotter the fire, the bigger the flames, the higher intensity. Works the same way out in the forest. The more fuels you have, the more intense and the bigger the flames. There's kind of a rule of thumb we use with fire behavior that just looking at the height of the fuels, or in this case, that's just a little bit of oak litter there, that the flames are going to be 2 to 3 times the height of that fuel when it's hot, dry, and often windy. So the taller the fuels, the higher the flame length, and the hotter and more intense the fire. The other thing is with wind. What happens with wind and fire? It goes a lot faster. And with slope, it does too. So the steeper the slope, the faster the fire burns. And in part, it's because the flames are leaning over, and now they're leaning with the slope. And if you hold a match up, can you put your finger closer to the side or the top? The side. Because that's the radiant heat, and this is the convective heat, the superheated gases. So when it's tilted sideways going up the hill, it's sending that heat up and pre-drying and preheating the fuels in front of it. So it just increases the whole thing. So we definitely have a lot of slopes in our county and around here. So what do we try to do in our defensible space, the forests that we love, and around our homes? We want to stop crown fire. What is crown fire? Well, it all starts at the surface. You have fires that are low to the ground, they're burning the material, the leaves, the sticks, the low plants, and then it ladders up with lower branches of the trees or small trees or shrubs near them. That's why we call it a ladder fuel, because it carries the fire from the surface up into the tops of the trees or the crown. And a crown fire is when the fire is moving from treetop to treetop to treetop, a crown fire. And the flame lengths can get quite high because the fuels are high, 2 to 3 times the height. So the purpose of fuel breaks and defensible space and along your evacuation routes, this usually I have an entire presentation on that. What we want to do, what's your purpose? Is it to reduce fire start, spread, and intensity? Yeah, I think so. To stop the laddering of fires from the surface to the crown? Sounds good. And then to stop crown fire spread from treetop to treetop. Now you'd think that if you stopped it from laddering, you wouldn't ever have this, but let's say your cleared area or your fuel breaks the width of this room here, and the trees are nice and open, but next to it, it's a really dense forest. It's going to go tree to tree to tree, and it's going to go right across your small area. So, you know, you have to think about thinning the trees in a bigger perspective in order to have an effect. So, what is a fuel break, which is also what a good defensible space zone is you have trees that they can be clumps or individuals that are widely spaced, and CAL FIRE even tells us how far they'd like them to be spaced. The crowns aren't touching, there's space in between. There are no ladder fuels, or very few. You can have a few shrubs or little trees, but they ought to be far apart from the big trees. And then light and short surface fuels. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So this is a picture from Placer County, a shaded fuel break. And, you know, I have my little flame icons, but there's continuous canopy going up from the canyon. And so there's going to be a crown fire, continuous fire, hot fire. It's going up the slope. And then it might, you know, spot some embers over here or move here, but it's not going to encounter much because the surface fuels have been treated. They may have done pile burning, and they've done a lot of broadcast burning there, and they've thinned the trees, and they've gotten rid of the ladder fuels. So it changes the fire behavior. So this is what we want. We want our homes to be there, and during a wildfire, we want it to look like that. A low, slow fire, safer for firefighters and homes. Do you think there's going to be a fire engine at all of our houses during a fire? No. So what we have to do is give our homes a fighting chance. And I don't know about you, but I want to have a green forest. This is actually from a prescribed burn workshop that I taught, so it's not during wildfire season, but her property is so cleaned up, it would be like that in wildfire season. So how do we do that? I'm going to talk a lot about removing fuels, not just reducing. So there's three, you know, those three layers we have to think about. The surface fuels, the ladder fuels, and the crown fuels. A lot of times we spend most of our time on the ladder fuels, cutting the tall shrubs, little trees, pruning up the branches, and that's a great thing to do. That is probably the most important priority to start. But in order to really prevent a crown fire, you also have to start spacing out those trees, because remember what I said, your property may be fine, but if it's really heavy fuels beside you, that crown fire is going to keep on going. So you need to thin your trees. And then the surface fuels, they can be harder to deal with, but they're very important, and I'll talk more about that in a little bit here. Now, this is from a wildfire, similar conditions to that crown fire I showed you. This is from the east side of the Plumas National Forest, where I'd set up, we'd measured the fuels, and similar conditions, droughty, you know, not super high wind, but the fire was burning as a crown fire in other places. This area had thinning and a prescribed burning less than 10 years ago. So the prescribed burn had consumed all those needles, and there were a few sticks left. So let's see what the behavior was there. It's during a wildfire. Now this is the fire where I had a near miss with somebody else experienced driving. And what happens is that, you know, a fire builds up their own column, and it built up and we didn't know. And we had to escape, and we escaped through a fuel break. And that was the kind of behavior that we encountered. So we know these treatments work on the bigger scale. This is from the King Fire on the El Dorado National Forest, and I was on that one studying fire behavior in a different way. And we were able to look afterwards and compare what happened with treated areas and untreated areas. And in general, from studies all over the western US, the risk of high-intensity fires is reduced 64% in areas that are burned at low intensity and definitely thinned. So here, these green areas have had a treatment of the ladder fuels, some of the crown fuels, and the surface fuels. They've been thinned, and they've had understory burning. The scorched areas, those trees are dead, but the fire burned more as a surface fire. They were thinned, the ladder fuels were treated, but there was still a lot of surface fuels there. And then this is the untreated area. Now it's also steep, so that made it more intense. But we know this works, not just from my cameras. So what are the treatment types? We can categorize them in different ways, and there's different treatment types that work better for surface or ladder or crown fuels, and just depending upon your situation or your preference. So mechanical or machine treatments are where we use to cut and thin trees and reduce the crown fuels. You can also use chainsaws and skidders and loaders to get them out that way, but they can do it mechanically. The good thing about that is that it covers large areas fast. It can increase the surface fuel, so you can't just leave it all there. You're gonna have to pile the big branches at least and do something with them. It's good on gentler slopes, not so good on really steep and super rocky soils. It can impact the soils a little bit, but usually the restrictions that CAL FIRE places, you can't do it on wet soils, that impact is minimal. By hand, how many of you use a chainsaw? Yeah, so you do a lot of this kind of treatment. So that's really good, especially for cutting the smaller trees and shrubs, the ladder fuels. You can use it to treat the crown fuels, but if you don't have a good place to take those logs, they're just sitting there. And my husband back there and I have had that problem for years. Finally, we were able to log this year. That's slower, but more thorough. And it's good on all slopes, rockier, steep. It can cost more. Get in better shape though, right? And you do often remove the surface fuels, but you can increase it. It depends on what you're doing. If you're cutting this stuff and leaving it, then you're increasing it. If you're piling it up and doing a pile burn or taking it to green waste, you're decreasing that. And then prescribed fire or controlled burns. That's another type of treatment, and that's most useful for removing surface fuels if it's broadcast and ladder fuels for pile burning. How many of you use pile burning? Great. And I'm teaching a workshop on Saturday on how to do it safely and legally. There's a number of people that don't always do that, but it's a very good tool. So it can be slower but thorough. It's good on all slopes. And around here, the fuels have accumulated so much, there's very few areas you could safely go out and do a broadcast burn without doing some treatment ahead of time. So usually we're gonna pile burn first. Some people follow that up with broadcast burning, some people don't. But I'll tell you later how you can take some courses and get some experience on that. One of the important things to think about, let's go back to what I talked about with fire behavior. The more fuels, the hotter the fire, right? So if we're removing the fuels, we have lower intensity. If we're just rearranging it, you're still gonna have that fuel there, it's just different. So with mastication, if you've got a field of manzanita, sometimes that can be a way to treat it. I prefer pile burning, but you can't always do that. Sometimes this is a choice. So it does help in that it makes the flames shorter because now the fuel's shorter. But it's still gonna burn very hot and it easily catches fire if there's embers landing on it. And if you're not careful, you can kill the trees if you burn it later. It just heats up the roots. I've done studies on this, but I'm not the only one. But it can be a very useful tool. Now, does it disturb the soil? Depends on what kind of machine it is and what the prescription is. So it's actually can be a good thing to incorporate it into the soil if it's not too much. And actually, the thing I recommend in a prescription, and I'm not the only one, is it's better to masticate into big pieces, not chips. And I'll explain more about that later. Removing is the best thing to do. So whether it's green waste, or in my neighborhood, we're lucky we have goats. We get to go feed them. Or pile burning. You're removing that fuel. That means the flames are going to be shorter, the intensity's lower, and it's less likely to catch fire because there's just less fuel there. So we have the choice how it burns. It's going to burn like this during a wildfire. Here comes a storm of embers from 6 miles away. Is it going to burn like that? So it all starts at the surface, right? Rarely do you have a fire that starts in a crown. It's almost always in the surface. So around here and in many places of the western US, we start with heavy surface fuels because it's just accumulated over time. We have a dry environment. It doesn't compost and break down very fast. That's why we get litter and duff this deep, because it doesn't fall from the trees that much every year. It just builds up and builds up. So then the embers land and start spot fires, and then we have the surface to ladder to crown. So we can choose how it goes by choosing to do something with the surface fuels for sure. So this is from a fire we measured in Georgia, and you're going to see what happens when some tiny little embers start and what happens. I have 2 of them because it took a long time at the beginning, but then it really went fast. Now you can't hear it, but I can hear the crown fire in the distance, and you'll see how the light changes. It gets light, and then it's going to get really dark at some point here. Okay, and then a little while after that, there they are. They're going to start to grow together. And pretty soon, it's going to get very dark and the main front's on its way. So a lot of times it'll be faster than that. And you can imagine that if you have lots and lots of embers, 2 is not very many, then it's all going to spread very, very fast. Okay, so let's talk more about treatment choices. We talked about surface, we talked about ladder, we talked about crown, but a lot of your choices depend upon the fuel or the vegetation type. So is it a forest? Do you have a lot of shrubs or chaparral? Or is it grass? For forested or surface fuels, is it dead fuels? Is it live fuels? Or is it both? Because you're going to eat different things are effective. If you have goats, they can be effective there on the live. They don't like to eat the dead part, right? A lot of our places have both. So we get to treat it all. That's what some of my property used to look like. It does not anymore. So with grass fuels, alongside the road, untreated, you're going to have big flames. You're not going to want to evacuate along that. You don't want that near your house. You don't want that in a fuel break. You can weed eat it, which is great. You're reducing the height. So now the flames are not going to be as big, but you still have that fuel there. It remains there. Animals remove the fuel. They eat it, they leave some there, but it's in a different form. They're removing it, so they're great. Mowing, just like weed eating, it's a good thing to do. It makes it shorter. The fuels are staying, so you're rearranging it. Animals, and then prescribed burning is a very safe way to go. There's a bit of that going on around here. First Rain Farms does a bit of that. And then if you're more advanced, like a burn boss like myself, you can just burn things that have not been grazed with the proper amount of water and experienced people, and you're removing the fuels. Now, what about shrubs and vines? These are some of our nemesis, right? Scotch broom. How many of you have Scotch broom along your road? Yeah. How about blackberries? Yeah, yep. So it all depends on whether it sprouts. You cut off the top and it regrows. For Scotch broom, pulling's the best way to do it. You can use herbicides, but I think you have to cut it first. Some people paint on there, but pulling's the way to go. But it's got seeds that last for 20 years or more in the soil. That's why you do your work and it keeps coming back. But we have been able to eradicate it in some areas, so there is hope. You can graze it, it'll regrow. Spray it, some people do that. You have to repeat it because it's going to keep on going. Non-sprouting, like our manzanitas here. They're at higher elevations, they sprout, but that's easier to deal with. We cut and pile it, great, where it's gone. We could chip or burn it, haul it to the green waste dump site, and you're good. Now, one thing about Scotch broom is that do any of you have a little tractor? Okay, I don't either. So, but the county, when they come along the side of the road and mow, they can be carrying Scotch broom seeds along their tires. And I've been railing at them about this for years. So if you do have equipment that comes, ask them to wash the weed, do a weed wash on it. Now, if you're using green waste, you're removing it, pulling, and then you're doing something with that Scotch broom, usually burning it because they won't let you use it for green waste. That's removing. Animals are removing. Biochar, that's another way to safely burn, that is removing. Pile burning's removing. Chipping depends on what you do with it, right? If you're leaving it, you're just rearranging it. If you're hauling it off, you're removing it. So the dead surface fuels on the forest floors, the sticks, the logs, the litter, the leaves, all of that stuff. You can rake it, and that's removing it, right? And you can use composting or green waste to remove that. Takes a lot of effort and time, but certainly works. I do a lot of that around our house. Chipping and removing it, ideal thing to do. If PG&E ever comes to your place, make them haul off the chips. Make them haul off the chips, because otherwise, if you're just leaving the chips there, you're just redistributing that fuels, right? It's still there. It can be fast. The cost depends. Prescribed burning or broadcast burning, once you have proper training, your site is prepared ahead of time, it can actually be a very cheap maintenance tool. But don't just go out and do it without learning first. So what about the pros and the cons of chipping and mastication? You know, there's never a perfect fuel treatment. The good thing about chipping and mastication, it's going to reduce the fuel height, it's going to reduce the flame length somewhat, and it's fast over large areas. However, and it can be cheaper. However, it is adding to the surface fuels. It breaks down slow in our climate. Do you have a pile of chips that has decomposed totally? No, because it's just going to take forever here. Here's the part that I learned about in wildfires, is that it readily ignites. Embers land, likes to ignite there, and the wind can make chips, flying embers. So think carefully about that. And if you burn in it or a wildfire comes, it can cook the tree roots in the soil because it smolders, it just burns for a really long amount of time. And heat for a long amount of time can kill things. So think of your hand and a cast iron skillet. If it's hot and I forget, I don't have a pot holder and I pick it up, but I take my hand away fast, I'm okay, right? Haven't burned it. If I hold on to it for a long period of time, even if it's not super hot, I'm going to burn my hand. So the same thing with tissues of tree roots and the stem. So chips can burn for a long amount of time. And it requires maintenance, suppresses the native wildflowers, sucks the nitrogen from the soil. And my really most hated part is it makes it harder to pull my enemy, the Scotch broom. And, you know, I always throw in something about roadside fuels because they're really important. And as Firewise communities, I can't emphasize enough, I've talked to some of the leaders here today, we need to work together more and get more of us out there working on our shared evacuation routes, because you can have a great defensible space, but if you're all trying to get out driving along that same road and there's fuels there, remember what I said, 2 to 3 times the height of the fuels? You don't want to be next to that in your car. So, always important. So what's best for you? Removing as much as possible is good for everybody. If you're in the city limits, there's no burning, although they have done experiments with the biochar kiln now. If you can get access to green waste, use it. We don't usually out where I live on the ridge. And if you thin your forest, you're not only going to decrease the crown fuels, you'll have less litter coming down every year, so you'll have less accumulation. Animals and prescribed fire are great maintenance tools. And if you've removed the ladder fuels, property's not too steep, you have friends or neighbors, consider prescribed burning. I'm not telling everybody to do it, but I have spent a lot of time teaching people to do it safely, legally, and responsibly. So I'm going to talk just a little bit more about that. I just stepped off the board of the Resource Conservation District, and we had gotten a CAL FIRE grant to teach people how to, neighbors helping neighbors burn safely. So one of the reasons why I spend so much time teaching people about it, it's the most effective tool at reducing surface fuels. And the older you get, it's the easiest thing to do. Much easier than raking once you have your system set up. But it's not something you just go, you know, put a match out there. You've got to before plan, prepare your site with control lines, get permits. During it, you have to know when the prescription, when the weather's the right conditions, and oftentimes you need to get a permit from CAL FIRE most times of the year, and they'll tell you you can't burn when it's hotter than 80 degrees or winds more than 6 miles per hour, they'll tell you. And then you don't just walk away. You're watching and controlling, you're holding it, and then afterwards, just like with a campfire, you're putting it out with dirt and water. So it's not just I mean, you really have to do it right. But it does reduce wildfire intensity. Remember I showed you this one that had been burned. This one had been burned. You can't even hardly see the flames. Those are during wildfires. It's the most effective at reducing surface fuels, and that person definitely helped them, definitely. It's also good, like I said, for thinning the little trees. So there's that ocean of little cedars. Are you going to want to go out there and prune each one of them? No. And if you masticated, the fuels are still there. But once you're set up to prescribe burn, you're going to kill most of them before they grow up into this dense thicket here. It's also good for the forest. You know, ash actually is like putting fertilizer on the forest for the trees. You're just releasing nutrients back. And it's good for habitat. One thing I like to point out to people is that most of the escape fires are pile burns. If you look at Ubinet, any of you do that happening now? Pile burn escape, pile burn escape, pile burn escape. And you talk, CAL FIRE comes to most of the prescribed burn classes I teach, and they talk about that. When the risk of a broadcast burn is far less, because you're doing all that preparation and you're making sure that you're ready and you know what you're doing. So, you know, you got to learn before you burn, and this guy's doing his due diligence. He's got his hose and his tool, and he's hanging out, and his fire's low to the ground, so he can relax in his chair. And then I'm no longer with the RCD, but it's a great local resource for you, the Resource Conservation District. It's been here since the 1940s. They were formed across the country in the Dust Bowl era. And you can get prescribed fire education there. You can get site visits. They'll come out and give you advice on what you're trying to do. And they have a program that they've been piloting for the county on grazing and fire safety around schools. So if you want to hire a herd, they have information on that. And with that, I was asked at the end to talk a little bit about our new organization, Fire Safe Nevada County Coalition. And I will just say briefly that during the LA fires, a group of us experienced FireWise community leaders decided we needed to do more to support FireWise communities specifically, but everybody. We have more than 100 in the county, and there can't be enough organizations to help us because there's so much to do. And so what we've done is the Coalition of FireWise Communities been around for a long time. They had quarterly meetings, they had a website. Well, now we've become more formal as a public benefit organization. We've greatly increased the website. We have a mentoring program for FireWise community leaders. I'm putting on workshops, and others are for FireWise community leaders or whoever. So I have a Pile Burn Safely one on Saturday. And we've got a newsletter, and we've got a spring campaign where we've made materials for FireWise leaders to bring out to their community, or you can go get them yourself on our website. And right now, springing into action, there's 3 emphasis areas: clearing along your evacuation routes, cleaning up your 0 to 5 foot no ignition zone, and reducing and removing fuels from your defensible space. So what we've done is we've just made some really simple handouts and compiled the information from the county and CAL FIRE. It's all in one place, simple, and you can just hand it out or email it out. So those are the kind of things that we do. A lot of education, a lot of support. Okay, well, thank you very much. I appreciate you having me.